Hey everyone, welcome back. We have a doozy of a subject today. We're going to continue on from the Sabbath subject we started on 2 weeks ago. I took a break for my son's graduation. We looked at the story of Jesus going to Peter's house on the Sabbath. Peter's mother-in-law was sick, and Jesus healed her. And we looked at the Sabbath and a healthier view of the Sabbath, what the Sabbath actually means instead of when it is. But today we're going to look at the toxic view of the Sabbath. And we're going to explore the fact that Jesus hit this subject head on, intentionally, over and over and over again. And we're going to start with the realization that on that day, when Peter invited Jesus home and Peter healed his mother-in-law, news spread throughout the village, the Jewish village, the Sabbath-keeping village, that this miracle had occurred. And then it curiously says that after the sun had set, they brought their sick to him to be healed. Now, when I was going to college, large Seventh-day Adventist presence in an otherwise non-Seventh-day Adventist community, and at the movie store, they referred to us as the sundown savages, because as soon as the sun went down, the video store, remember back in the day when you had to rent videos and to bring them home to watch them, would fill up with Seventh-day Adventists. These barriers of sunset Friday to sunset Saturday, nothing wrong with those barriers. God put them in place, but what we've done with them and what we've turned the Sabbath into in between those 2 points of time is frankly toxic. And I shared with you how my dad, we'd got into this conversation, I don't remember what started it, and his closing argument was that the Jews kept the Sabbath better than we do. To which I responded, Dad, is that really the example that you want to set? Is that really the model that you want to follow? So before we get into it, I want you to think about this. Those sick people in that village suffered for hours longer than they needed to so that they could keep the law and bring them after the Sabbath. Now, extrapolate that mindset into the bigger picture. How many people who are suffering away from Jesus are being kept from Jesus by a toxic mindset? In other words, those who are the guardians, the gatekeepers of faith, those who have the truth, are actually a barrier between people who need him and him. So, just to show you, as a beginning point, in Luke chapter 4, Jesus is the story of this people bringing the sick after Sabbath. In Luke 6, Jesus' disciples were plucking some grain as they walked along the road and eating the seeds and were accused of Sabbath breaking. And Jesus defended them, even referencing David going into the temple and taking the bread, which was unlawful to do. In Luke 13, there was a woman who was bent over for 18 years. And Jesus, meeting her for the first time, healed her on the Sabbath, for which he was roundly criticized. And his response to them was, how many of you, if you have a donkey that gets stuck in a ditch on Sabbath, would not lift it out? Then shouldn't she be freed who's been bound for 18 years? Jesus is intentionally making the Sabbath a point of controversy, trying to expose to them their own toxic thinking. In Luke 14, Jesus is invited to the home of a Pharisee on the Sabbath to have a meal. During that meal, he heals someone who's there, and then again confronts them and says the same thing, basically. If you had an animal that needed you on the Sabbath, what would you do? And it says they could not answer him. In Mark 3, Jesus is teaching in the synagogue again. A man comes in with a withered hand, and it says Jesus looked around at them in anger, called the man forward, and healed him. Why is he angry? It's pretty rare to find Jesus described as angry. Rare indeed. But I believe he was angry because he was standing in a house that had his father's name on it, run by people who claimed to be followers of his Father, yet were nothing like him. And sick people were being kept sick unnecessarily. People in need were being kept in need unnecessarily so that they could maintain their holiness. John 5, man at the pool of Bethesda. Jesus healed him, told him to take up his mat and go home. It was the Sabbath. Jesus knew for sure when he told him to pick up his mat and go home. He could have said, leave the mat, come back and get it tomorrow. Nope. He could have said, leave, come back and get it after sunset. Nope. He said, I want you to carry it right through all these people, right beside the temple. That's where the pool is. And immediately, resistance built. What's going on? You can't do that today. John 7. There was a heated discussion about the healing on the Sabbath. John chapter 9. Jesus healed a blind man on the Sabbath. And the religious leaders, some of them, they were divided on this, but some of them concluded that Jesus couldn't possibly be from God because he did not keep the Sabbath. Coming back to John chapter 5, when he healed a man at the pool of Bethesda, they sought to kill him over it. Kill him. So here's the deal. Religious people make the measuring stick, and then they judge Jesus and truth and everybody else by their measuring stick. So some of you may not be familiar, some of you are. I went to a Jewish website, kabod.org. You can look it up yourself, to look at their Sabbath laws. This is the opening paragraph of their Sabbath law page. The Shabbat, Sabbath, laws are quite complex, requiring careful study and a qualified teacher. At first, it's often overwhelming and seems like an impossible number of restrictions. But spending Shabbat with others who are Shabbat observant will show you that eventually you too will become comfortable with the Shabbat laws, as long as you realize that becoming Shomer Shabbat, a Shabbat observant, is a gradual process rather than an overnight transformation. You will also recognize that the wealth of details provides for a lifetime of scholarship. Even those who have been keeping Shabbat for years find that there is always more to learn on this subject. This is the mindset that warred against Jesus when he was here. These many restrictions, this complexity, it doesn't come from God. It doesn't come from the Bible. The Bible actually has very few Sabbath laws, and the laws that are there when they're understood, they're for our benefit and for the blessing of people around us. Now let me read to you some are just a few, they say, of their basic. Let's start with some basic activities from which we refrain on Shabbat. Number 1, writing, erasing, and tearing. Heaven forbid that on the Sabbath you should tear the page out of a book and write something down on it, and then heaven forbid you should make a mistake and have to erase it and start over. Number 2, business transactions. Number 3, driving or riding in cars or other vehicles. Number 4, shopping. Number 5, using a telephone. Number 6, turning on or off anything which uses electricity, including lights, radios, television, computer, air conditioners, and alarm clocks. Number 7, cooking, baking, or starting a fire. Number 8, gardening or grass mowing. Number 9, doing laundry. Then they ask this question: does all this mean that Shabbat is somewhat of a miserable affair where we sit hungry in the dark? Now, I know that some people within my own denomination, we're Seventh-day Adventists, we are also Sabbath keepers, have some very definite ideas about how Sabbath should be kept. All I want to say about that is be careful where your ideas come from. it could be that in your zeal to keep the Sabbath, you're actually keeping people away from Jesus. Just like that Sabbath afternoon when the sick had to suffer for hours waiting for the sun to go down. Here's the root of it. There's this mentality in us that the more restrictive something is, the more holy it is. That the more rules we build around something, the more godly it must be. But the very one who came here, the creator of us, the Word made flesh, God in human form, the one who made us and the Sabbath, when he came here, he constantly opposed their toxic and restrictive view of the Sabbath. Intentionally. Over and over and over. And yet today, still, within the Jewish community and within many within the Seventh-day Adventist community, there's still this idea that the more restrictive it is, the more holy it is. It's not a God idea. It's not a Bible idea. It's a human idea. And I can tell you after 25 plus years in ministry that people are more impassioned about their ideas than they are about what the Bible actually says. And when people say they want to hear the truth preached, what they really mean is they want to hear their truth preached. And oftentimes those truths stand as a wall between Jesus and the people who actually want to come to him. There is no law anywhere in the Bible in any shape or form that says you can't bring the sick to Jesus or to God on the Sabbath, that you can't help people on the Sabbath, that you can't heal people on the Sabbath. It's not there. And yet the Jewish leaders who were keeping the Sabbath, as my dad said, better than we do, said Jesus can't be from God because he breaks the Sabbath. According to who? Breaks it according to who? You see, we make up the rules and then we judge people by them. As Jesus simply said, you keep as doctrines the commandments of men. Now, just to show you that this idea that the more restrictive it is, the more holy it is not my idea, let me read to you what the Bible says about it. This is Colossians chapter 2. Colossians chapter 2, 21 says this. Do not touch, do not taste, do not handle. And I'm telling you, as sure as I'm sitting here and you're watching me, that I heard a sermon based on this verse and this verse alone about all the things that we should not touch, taste, or handle. And it was pretty restrictive. Now let's read what Paul was actually saying to the people in Colossae in context. 20, verse 20. Actually, I'm going to go all the way back to 18. It's always tricky to know where to start and where to stop when you're talking about context. I would encourage you to go back and read the whole letter. It's not very long. It would take you probably 10 minutes to read the whole thing from start to finish. 18. Let no one cheat you of your reward, taking delight in false humility and worship of angels, intruding into those things which he has not seen, vainly puffed up by his fleshly mind. In other words, there are people in the church who want to make themselves look really good by the things they say they have seen or know or believe or do or follow. Not holding fast to the head. He's already said the head is Jesus. From whom all the body, that's the rest of us, nourished and knit together by joints and ligaments, grows with the increase that is from God. Therefore, if you died with Jesus from the basic principles of this world, Why, as though living in the world, do you subject yourselves to regulations? Do not touch, do not taste, do not handle, which all concern things which perish with the using, according to the commandments and doctrines of men. These things indeed have an appearance of wisdom in self-imposed religion, false humility, and neglect of the body, but they are of no value against the indulgence of the flesh. Paul says, why are you living according to the way the world functions? Oh, don't do that. Don't touch this. Don't touch that. Don't handle this. Don't. You see, we come into religion and we put Jesus' name on the same attitudes and the same mindset that we always had. That's why Jesus was so angry when he came into the synagogue. It has his Father's name on it. It's led by people who claim that they're being led by God, and yet they're behaving in completely opposite of how God would behave. Completely. People were being held away from Jesus till the sun went down, because obeying the rules is more important than people. You can be certain you have lost your way or never found your way if maintaining rules is more important than suffering humanity. If holding up a standard is more important than helping up a brother. Let me tell you a practical story. And the people who told me this story are beautiful people, and they found Jesus, and they told me this story with tears in their eyes. They were born and raised Seventh-day Adventists. Sun goes down Friday, you stop working, you don't work again until the sun goes down on Sabbath. They lived beside a couple. They were close to them, they were neighbors for a while, but they were moving away. And the moving truck was scheduled to come on Sunday, and they were scheduled to help them load it. Well, whatever happened with the scheduling of the truck, it showed up on Sabbath, and they were scrambling trying to find people because they weren't expecting the truck to be there. And they asked their neighbors if they could come over. They were at home doing nothing because it's Sabbath, the do-nothing day. And they said they couldn't come because it was Sabbath. And today they say, we wish we could have that time back to do it over and do it the right way. The Sabbath commandment does not say you cannot do work on Sabbath. It says you cannot do your work. In other words, it's not a day of selfishness. It's not a day of self-serving. That's why it specifies neither you, nor your son, nor your daughter, nor your manservant, nor your maidservant, nor the cattle, nor the stranger. Because it has been done, and it continues to be done, where strict Sabbath keepers will hire other people to do their work on the Sabbath. Even something as silly as turning it on and off lights for them. This is not the faith of Jesus. This is not the example of Jesus. You won't find this mindset in Jesus. You won't find it modeled by Jesus. Jesus came here because he loves us. And he poured out his life day after day by people most of the time who didn't appreciate him at the least and usually opposed him. But he just kept doing it because he loves us. And love doesn't stop. Love doesn't take a day off. The Sabbath wasn't meant to be a restrictive idol, which we can hold up and say, look, God, look what I did for you. In fact, the Bible doesn't say the Sabbath was made for God. It was made for us. And if we really understood how Jesus used the Sabbath, how Jesus kept the Sabbath would become a blessing, not only to those who keep it, but to anyone under the influence or in the circle of influence of those who keep it. A day where we're free from all the regular stuff of life to be a true blessing to those around us. That's the model of Jesus. if you didn't get anything else from this, being restrictive, making rules, it looks holy, but it's not holiness. Holiness is loving people, self-sacrificing love for others. That's holiness. We'll see you next time.